Hello, everyone, and welcome to another interesting episode of the Reflection series where we listen to stories that recharge and rejuvenate us. And today we have a wonderful speaker, Dr. Tjanara Goreng Goreng. Tjanara is a Wakka Wakka Wulli Wulli Traditional Custodian of the Djawun Djumbe Nation of Central Queensland. Tjanara is the CEO of OneINMA Global, a transformational leadership and research consultancy, founder and national convener of the Foundation for Indigenous Recovery and Development Australia, FIRDA, a retired public sector executive, academic scholar, and a public policy commentator on First Nations affairs. She's also been a student of the Raj Yoga for 40 years and has a deep understanding of the linkages between Indigenous spiritual practices and Raj Yoga philosophy and coordinates service programs for First Nations people. So a lot into that experience of so many years. And the title of the story that she would be sharing with us is Recovery of the Spirit or the Self. And it's about a journey of resilience, overcoming the traumas of abuse, addiction, mental and emotional ill health using determination. So a very interesting topic and a very experienced and wise speaker we have with us today. So without any further ado, a very, very hearty welcome to the program, Tjanara, and it's over to you to share your story with us. Welcome once again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lata. It's really wonderful to be here and to be with you all today to talk about this topic. When Lata asked me to talk, I thought, well, I'll talk about the thing that's had the most deep experience in my life, and I guess it's become part of my sort of life's work as well, very unexpectedly. So. I'll start from talking about the story. I started Raj Yoga in 1984 when I was a young mother with a stressful job. And I, after some years, after a little while, realized that I needed to stop drinking and smoking what we call yandi in our culture, but marijuana. Essentially, social recreational use. But I didn't realize that it had become a very deep problem because I have generational addiction and dependency to chemicals in my family of origin, mostly as a result of First Nations people in Australia being colonised. And I was working at the time, being on the board of a women's refuge in Canberra, and I worked there with some other women and Aboriginal women because we had a lot of homeless Aboriginal women on the streets in Canberra, and our role was to support them into accommodation. But what they did as an extension of that was help women recover from their addictions. So women would come from the Canberra Hospital Detox and come to our refuge, and then we would support them through a program of recovery. I began to read some of the books in the library there, people by John Bradshaw, Melody Beattie, and other people who talked about family, generational, alcoholism and addiction and dysfunction and its impact on the development of children as a result of this work. And part of my job was to take these women to AA meetings, the 12-step programs, as well as NA meetings and adult children meetings. And I used to sit up the back and wait for these meetings to finish to drive people home. And over a period of, I think, 6 to 12 months, I began to identify with some of the things that people were talking about, even though my life was fairly fine. I lived a normal middle-class life in Canberra with a husband, a child, a house, a mortgage, car, all of that. And I was working in a community agency. I'd had a very good career in the public sector. I'd been to university, trained as a social worker, etc. And as I began to read this, I began to identify the impacts on my own family and the fact that, alcohol was introduced to Australia and many First Nations people became dependent on it as a result of the process of colonisation. And I began to see how it impacted on my family and then how it was impacting on me, because in my social circle, we all drank and, smoked yandi, used cocaine, these kind of things. And it wasn't, it wasn't unusual. It didn't seem to be a problem to anyone until one day I looked in my fridge, and the only thing that was in my fridge was bottles of wine. And I realized that I was getting mentally and emotionally unwell until one day at work I discovered I actually couldn't write a sentence. And I'd lost my capacity mentally to be able to do my job, really. And so one day at work, I spoke to the addiction worker who was very well trained, and she said to me, think about the fact that you might have an addiction to alcohol. So I began to stop drinking and using in 1988 and became sober and clean, went to a 12-step program and still do to this day, now being 35 years sober. And it was from that moment on, my life really transformed. So I'd been doing Raj Yoga for 4 or 5 years, but not really all the time. But I'd been meditating because it helped me relax, it helped me do my job, it helped me be a mother, stick to my organized timetable, etc. But what I really think happened was it helped me come to a place where I could make a decision that this was what I had to do. And it wasn't until I was 8 years sober in 1994, 95, after coming back from India, that the police contacted me because they had discovered that I had a connection to a case they were doing where they were trying to put a Catholic priest from Queensland in jail, and they had 3 other people involved, and they needed somebody who didn't know these other 3. And somehow they got my name from a colleague in Queensland who knew that I was working in this field. And I'd been sexually abused as a child by this priest. I'd had other people also do it when I was much younger, but I was at a boarding school, and they were trying to get this priest convicted. And what happened was I gave evidence, and they convicted him to serve 12 years in jail. And it was around this time that I realized that I was very unwell from the trauma of that childhood experience, because I was sober enough to realize, and things were going on where I was just very depressed and unhappy, and I had to give up working because I wasn't capable. So this was 1994. And I eventually went home to Queensland to stay after my father died from Sydney. And it was there that I went and met all the bishops and so on in the Catholic Church that I knew, who knew about this priest being in jail. And the church had not apologized to me or done anything. So I had this very strong determination, because it was the International Year of Indigenous People. And I had this very strong determination to go to the bishop and say, you need to make amends to me somehow, or at least to my mother and to my family. But my mother knew about it, but we'd not had a deep discussion. But I knew that she had to have the opportunity to tell these bishops how devastating it was for her, because she sent us all to boarding school. 5 of us out of 7 went to boarding school, and she paid for it, scrubbing floors. She was a cleaner. And she did that for 20 years. And she told me that she never saw her salary because it went to the school to pay for our education. We didn't get government assistance in those days. And so I met with the bishop because he knew who I was. The priest was in jail. And basically, they didn't have any pathway to make an apology. So I just kept insisting by meeting all these other bishops and putting pressure on him and saying, do you want me to go to the media to tell them in this year of reconciliation with Indigenous people that you're talking about this in public, but you're not actually doing anything about this, with the first First Nations person to put a priest in jail for childhood sexual abuse. And so eventually they agreed to a mediation and lawyers and so on. And one of the main things out of this process was that I was able to get my mother to have a conversation with the bishop in charge twice, so that she could tell him how she felt and they could apologise to her appropriately. And there were other things they did. They apologised publicly in the media. And they did other things, you know, for me. So it was then really when I went back to Queensland in 1996 that I entered therapy. So I entered long-term therapy with a psychiatrist because I had developed dissociative disorder from the childhood sexual abuse, and it was interfering with my ability to work. And, you know, by this time I had 3 degrees. I'd done high-level policy work in the government. I'd started having an academic career. I'd worked in a couple of universities, and it was impossible for me to write. It was impossible to get out of bed. It was impossible. Like my daughter says, I wasn't even there, you know, emotionally, I don't think, for so many years of her life. And it was very, very difficult. I was very suicidal. And there were actually my BK friends were the ones that supported me the most. And my Brahma Kumaris friends that I'd known for many years in meditation. And I really only could rely on the fact that I was alive, that I was going to therapy with a psychiatrist who was an expert in this field. And I was willing to do whatever it took to recover because I wanted to be whole. I wanted to be the person I knew that inside I could be. There was something inside of me, like a spirit, that said to me, you know, this damaged person is not you. The true spirit of you is somewhere inside there. And I knew that from going to India, from meditating, by having this relationship with all these very inspirational and sort of divine elders and beings in the Brahma Kumaris. But I also had that in the elders of my ancestral line here in Australia. And I'd been adopted by these 2 senior traditional custodians of Uluru who were very wise old Aboriginal elders. And one of them, Kumanara Randall, who's passed now, he was an old man, and in 2011 I started doing my PhD with them, and he taught me about the principle of Kanyini, where we maintain harmony with everything in our world. So we maintain harmony with ourselves and our own feelings, with our relationships with other people, and then with our environment so that we can keep the world in a pure state. And so this was practiced by our ancestors for a very long time to keep Australia in that way and to keep our relationships with other clans and with ourselves and with the earth and animals. And it was a principle of the way of our First Nations life. And I'd been taught other things by my mother, but this was a very deep principle because he was like a yogi. You know, he had this high level of consciousness. And I was studying sacred leadership and using him as one of my examples. And people would come from around the world to meet him because he embodied the way of Kanyini. He embodied this, you always felt unconditionally loved in his presence. And in my grandmother's presence, that's his niece, Jikatu. And they were always so accepting, even though they lived in a very difficult place in Central Australia. So it was really, I began to, when I was home in Queensland, I began to make contact with my own clan and family and started to be on the country of my origin. And that made me feel safe. And then being with this psychiatrist made me feel safe. And I went every week for 7 years until I came back to Canberra, and then continued that relationship and still continue that relationship today. And still have a psychiatrist here in Canberra that I see every month or so, just to keep me on track. In 1993, I went to America because I'd been reading a lot about John Bradshaw, and I'd by this time trained as a therapist and was working academically in research around family systems theory, and he was considered the sort of American expert. So I went to his clinic to train in non-shaming therapy, and it was there that I realized how damaged I was from what had happened emotionally, because it affects your development as a child. And that's when I decided that I would definitely deal with everything. And he had said to me, you know, one of the things about healing shame is that when you touch the shame of what has happened to you and the shame that the perpetrator has put on you, once you touch that shame and acknowledge it and speak about it or write about it or externalize it out of your mind and your body, it goes away and never affects you again. And so I did this but I must say that I could not do it without my determination. But the determination came from a very deep relationship that I had with what we call Bayami, who's the creator being in our culture. You know, people say God, Yahweh, Shiva, whatever. We call that being Bayami. And so from as a little child, I had this strong relationship because my mother had taught me about it. And then I went to Catholic schools for 12 years and a Catholic university. So I understood the Christian relationship with, you know, God. But I'd had this deep relationship through the practice of Raj Yoga. And so it was, I remember saying, you know, to this higher being, I will surrender to you and I need you to hold me while I do this recovery, because there was no one else I could trust. Like, nobody in my family could do this for me. In fact, many people just abandoned me. Like, it was like too hard to talk about. And so when I came back from learning from John Bradshaw, I realized and started to write about how colonization creates children with the same behavior patterns as people who are alcoholic in a family or abusive in a family, because I'd learned from Bradshaw and from this other family therapist who'd worked with First Nations people for 20 years, where she discovered that the children of colonization, First Nations children, had the same behavior patterns as teenagers as children who grew up in alcoholic or violent abusive families. And I thought, oh, that's what's happening in Australia to First Nations people. So lucky for me, I had the benefit of my education, my employment, and also this willingness to have a spiritual relationship because I wanted to be whole. And I must emphasize that it was actually would have been impossible without that third part of it. You know, I could have gone along with all the other stuff, but to have the strength of surrender, to feel safe with something that doesn't actually exist on the planet, but is, you know, out in the ether somewhere, and to have a deep faith and trust of that I would be looked after and that somehow eventually I would recover. And I remember having a meeting with Daddy Janki in 1996, and I told her that I'd been diagnosed with this mental health illness and that it was quite distressing and that I was determined, you know, to do whatever it took to recover, and that I'd been sober by then for like 10 years, maybe, not quite. And she just, you know, sat with me in silent meditation for a while and held my hand and said, just take courage, be determined, and do what you need to do, and do the self-service required for you to do what you need to do. And I just, you know, went home and thought that's all I could do. And it was all I could think about for many, many years. And it wasn't until the early 2000s, from 1996, that I could go back to work because I'd recovered part of myself. And so that determination had to sort of hold me right up until recently, when I go to the clinic, a mental health clinic, 3 weeks every year, just to do the inner work that requires me to stay stable, because, you know, I do have a condition that that will eventually be integrated to a point where I will be whole. And it's getting close to that point now. Like, I really feel like I'm close to that point because I've done the work required to do what needs to be done in the therapy to get there. But I think the one that I knew I needed to have the courage and the determination, because no one was going to do this for me, that I had to do it alone. And the only being I had was, you know, God to help me. And that, you know, things would come along to help me as I went down the track. And that did happen. Like, friends came along to help, you know, new family. My daughter had grandchildren, you know, this kind of stuff. And so your desire for living and life transforms. And I was having a conversation with a dear friend yesterday that I've known for many, many years, and she's in the same situation, recovering. And, you know, I said, it's finished now. Like, I'm content. I'm actually getting the benefit of what I worked to do to this point. And that, you know, meditation on a regular basis and wanting to have a higher consciousness about what was going on, and the ability to use my education to just keep learning, reading. My psychiatrist would just, he had this bookshelf with books, and he would just say, take whatever book you need and read it and bring it back. And I would just keep reading and reading because I wanted to know so much about what I could do about the condition, about all the things around it, because not only do I have that condition, but one of my alters, which is part of my condition, has bipolar. So I have to deal with that. And then, I have another one that has ADHD. So I have to deal with that. And these are things that, my parents didn't know when I was a child. They just sent me to become a swimming champion because I had too much energy and too much impulsivity. And my mother was like, she's got to do something. She's got too much energy. So they just sent me to swimming. And the thing about swimming was I was able to like swim up and down this pool every morning for 12 years, 15 years training. And it was very soothing and calm for this child. So no matter what happened, I could get in the pool every morning and every night. And I would just have to swim 60 laps, every day just to train the body to be, a champion swimmer. And that helped, I think, really. It calmed me down, it soothed me, and it dealt with all those things that were going on that the doctors and my parents were just like, no idea, we just think she's boisterous and energetic. And in fact, it was like the way in which I was responding to what was happening. So I'm very grateful for, my education, my family, the particular wisdom of my mother culturally and as a person who would say things like, just remember, the Catholics don't know everything there is to know about God, and people don't know everything there is to know, and your own self has deep secrets. She would say all these really wise things to me, and I would go, oh yes, I get it. And then I had the benefit of being able to go and meet John Bradshaw and practice in his hospital and learn this particular form of therapy that actually helped me recover my own self by doing it for myself, and then watching other people have the benefit of its application as well. And, I really did know, I really did have a feeling that the spiritual and the cultural life, like ceremony, is part of the development of a child in our culture. And at every developmental phase that we transition into a higher level of emotional consciousness, we have a ceremony to take the person through that. And, Kumana Randall and Jikatu, his niece, they had brought me back to that in their wisdom and their eldership. And as I did my PhD with them and they told me their stories, it enabled me to be inspired to want to be that kind of a wise person. And then I also had these other people in my life who were wise. And, there are signs all around us in the world where a sign will just come to you and you just go, oh, that was meant to be. Like you might drive down a street that has a name that is sort of telling you something, and there's a sign. Or the eagle flies over at a particular point and there's another sign. Or, I used to just get on a plane and go out to Uluru to see Kumanara whenever I felt that pull, because I knew I was learning something important and I could do it because it was part of my work. So, the priest went to jail. I saw him after he came out of jail. I definitely went through the whole process of being willing to touch that shame, being willing to let it go. And I can say now that I'm content and happy, but there were times right up until, last year where I would be having panic attacks, flashbacks, and I would have to talk to myself and tell myself that this was part of my recovery and it was okay. And then, just do meditation, be determined to do your practice. And I didn't do it well every day because, I think it's good to use your free will and not be controlled or institutionalized into any practice. And that's good for your mind to be able to make your own choices. But it happens now naturally because it's what I really love to do and I choose to do it. And I see the benefit of developing my emotional intelligence, and recovering that early childhood development really helps your emotional intelligence. And I see it with my granddaughter who's 6, and she has not been affected by any traumas. And so her emotional intelligence is way up there. My daughter's a very good mother in saying, you know, well, tell us how you feel, use your words. And she's very confident, you know, she will say back to her mother, it's not okay for you to talk to me like that just because I'm a child. So she has these very strong emotional boundaries, and her language is great. And that's what children need. But, you know, when we're controlled in environments or, you know, families of origin that have dysfunctionalities of any sort, there's rigid controlling, there's denial, you know, there's all sorts of things going on that researchers have actually patterned out now, so we know about it. So, yeah, I've had the benefit of all of those things to bring me to this point. But I think if you want to recover, you do have to have a deep determination, and you do have to have the courage to face anything. And learning about the 8 powers in this practice of meditation has really helped me, because some days I have to say to myself, what power do you need today? And it's always the power to face, you know, or the power to tolerate, and or cooperate, you know, or just to deeply listen to myself. So these things are very, you know, having the benefit of having these come to me in my life. And I remember saying to the higher power one day, I said, whatever it is that I need, whatever tool I need, whatever I need to do for this recovery to happen, I'm willing to do it. You know, I just want to find everything that can help me do this. And so I guess that's just part of me and my way. I think because I trained as an athlete, you know, I have a very strong determination to win or to achieve. But also when you train as an athlete, you learn to go through the obstacles. You learn to go through the pain of your own body when you have to beat somebody and you're just exhausted because you've just, you know, swam 4 laps at a, you know, a really hard rate, and you have to get to the end and they're like right next to you and you want the gold medal. So I've learned to push myself, you know, and use my imagination to get there. And so yeah, I think really that's my story. And so in 2000, a couple of Aboriginal women who worked in mental health and drug and alcohol recovery in Queensland Health, we got together and we decided there was a lot of white psychiatrists and people who worked in our field who absolutely knew nothing about Aboriginal culture and the need of Aboriginal people who were coming to clinics with trauma and mental health issues, and they were being diagnosed with schizophrenia, and they were just suffering from trauma, and we could see it, and we wanted them to start using traditional Ngangkri medicine that helps the spirit recover. And so we started to advocate for this and get involved in policy development to have things change, and then do volunteer therapeutic long-term therapy with our First Nations families who have either individual childhood sexual abuse stories or collective stories in their families, and so that they don't have to go to people who, you know, they can't afford. I mean, who can afford a psychiatrist at $380 an hour? So, you know, we're trained in these fields, not as psychiatrists, but as psychologists and social workers and mental health workers. So we can provide a level of, you know, free therapeutic recovery for people who really need it. And also we practice traditional Ngangkri medicine. And so, you know, it's been in our line, in our families, and we have the gifts to do it. And, you know, one day Kumanara Randall said to me, you're a Ngangkri, which means, you know, once an elder says to you, that's it, you go and practice. And, you know, it's a medicine of spiritual psychic recovery. And so I do that now as part of our foundation. And we do, you know, Aboriginal women's business retreats for people so that they can practice their cultural ceremony, and, you know, that identifies them, that helps them identify who they are. And it's that step on the journey. If you can, you know, say to yourself, you know, I am First Nations, this is my land, this is my culture, it starts bringing their spirit back, because really they feel like that's been completely abandoned. And so that's really what I wanted to tell people about, that this is like my personal journey, and it's also been my sort of work and academic journey. But it's just, you know, my own personal life, lived experience. And so those things have really helped me. And I'm glad, you know, because from the age of 16, I just wanted to kill myself because I didn't have the capacity to deal with the feelings that were happening in me. And I didn't have people around me who could say, you're safe, it's okay to tell people you're angry. It's okay that you feel deep shame. In the world now, we have so many places where people can go and young people can go and say, you know, this is, you don't have to do things to yourself, you can actually recover. So yeah, that's my story.
That's
And
beautiful.
that's my you know, journey to my own self, and now I can really say I'm very content as a
It's
grandmother with what I have now.
Yeah, it's such an inspiring story, and thank you for sharing that with us, Janara, because
Mm.
we don't know anyone who's watching this, maybe, wanting to know something, or maybe just not aware, and someone sharing their story will definitely help someone find some light or some solution in some way. So thank you for having the courage and sharing it with us so openly today. And as you said, meditation and the spiritual friends that you had also helped you so much on this journey of recovery. And you yourself, as you said, have been practicing for 40 years, which is a long, long time. Uh, and as a regular meditation, I think we won't go into question answers today, but it would be wonderful if we can have a little bit of that meditation experience. If you can speak a commentary for us for a few minutes, so the viewers also get a chance to experience that.
Sure.
Thank you.
So just sit comfortably in the space that you're in and listen to the music that we have in the background. And see yourself as you truly are. Just feel very comfortable in your body. Take a deep breath and just allow yourself to relax. And think for a moment about who you really are, what you imagine yourself to be. Imagine yourself as a beautiful energy being in this world, that energy is especially pure, that you yourself are the embodiment of everything that you need to be, that you are a sacred being, that sacred being, which is you, is meant to be here in this world for your benefit, but also for the benefit of all the relationships you bring to this world, the beauty that is essentially yourself. Think of all the things about yourself that are particularly positive, beautiful. Not just your physical body, but your inner self, your inner strength, the values that you have. Perhaps you are virtuous, you are honest, you are pure in your thinking. Perhaps you like integrity, authenticity. What are you like in your relationships? Are you kind, compassionate? Others with empathy, unconditional love. Think of these qualities. Think of what other people would say about you. Special qualities. And for a moment, just imagine those qualities around you, written. Words describe you. You're creative, you're imaginative, you're innovative, you tolerate, you have unconditional regard and love, respect, honesty, purity, simplicity, We all have virtues, many virtues. Think of all the virtues that are you. We are born sacred beings. Always tell yourself that you are a sacred being, that you are in this world to live a sacred life, whatever that life is. Allow yourself to travel each moment, each day, way of sacredness, whatever that is for you. Allow yourself to be the higher being that you are meant to be. You came into this world to give to this world, to give and share with your parents, with your siblings, with your extended family. And from this day on, share that with everyone. And just imagine yourself now walking in the world as you are in this way, sacred being. Thank you, Lata.
Thank you, Janara, for that wonderful sharing, wonderful experience, and being generous to share that wisdom with everyone. And thank you for all the viewers for joining in today. If you would like to know more about us, please do visit our website, www.brahmakumaris.org.au. All the details of our programs and the centers is available there, and you're welcome to pay a visit. Thank you once again, and take care. Om Shanti. We'll be back with another interesting episode of the Reflection Series.